To mention here is that this is not an issue that's unique to Fort Wayne. It's very, very common in most municipalities where over time parking, aspects of parking were assigned to different areas. For example, Public Works was handling the streets, we had on-street parking, let's give on-street parking to Public Works. So now we've got some revenue to take care of and manage, we'll put that over to finance because they're experts in that. Well, now we have an enforcement function. Well, police, they do enforcement, that makes sense. Now we start developing facilities, we'll put that in the facilities group because that's what their expertise is, and that all makes perfectly good sense. But at some point in the evolution of downtowns, when you're trying to focus on downtown revitalization and those kind of things, economic development, you start looking at how is parking managed, because you try to have a meeting about downtown master planning or strategic planning, and everybody wants to talk about parking. And so you started saying, well, how are we organized anyway? How did we get this way? And is there a more efficient, effective way to organize parking systems? And it turns out, from our research, there are about 4 or 5 really successful models. And what we're going to talk about today is some of the key characteristics of those models and give you a couple alternatives that we think make sense for Fort Wayne. So that's really the gist of this. It's really about effective parking management strategies for a municipality. We were asked to identify specific operational and transitional issues and challenges and develop a logical transition and implementation action plan. And as I mentioned, this was our third of 3 trips, so this is pretty much the wrap-up of this piece of the assignment. We were here probably just a couple of months ago. We were, as we left, we've gone through a couple of iterations. One was to kind of refresh everybody's memory, the initial visit, about where this study came from. And this study actually was an outgrowth of another study that was done that looked at the overall parking management program and an assessment of that. And one of the things that was noted during that assessment was that your organizational structure, as common as it is to other cities, was an area that could use some improvement. And so we came back and talked about how this idea evolved. And we worked with you on a set of guiding principles, which we'll talk about just briefly here. We're not going to rehash that. But that was sort of the strategic framework that we were working from. And then we were asked to make some specific organizational structure, reporting relationships, departmental scope issues, and position descriptions. And then also to provide an action plan based on kind of a first 3 months, first 6 months, first year program. We're just going to touch on those things. But all of those documents and all that work has been given to the city on a CD. The ultimate goal that we hope the outcome of this study will provide is to help make downtown Fort Wayne more visitor friendly. I think if there was one phrase that I would want to keep in mind, that would be the phrase. Another thing is that the parking management approach should be comprehensive and strategic in nature. And again, the way that things are being handled right now, it doesn't mean that it's being done wrong. In fact, I think you've got a very good enforcement program. You've got a lot of different programs that are working well, but there's nobody's looking at the relationship between on-street rates and off-street rates, for example. Nobody looking at how parking on-street and how parking off-street and how special events parking and how the new Harrison Square project is going to impact residential parking. So just taking a comprehensive look at all those issues and making sure that they're managed as a system and not as a bunch of individual pieces is really a key goal. Optimizing the management of existing parking resources, just more effective management. Support downtown economic development, and then create a collaborative and inclusive approach to parking planning and management, which I think the planning piece is also an important function. Ultimately, we want a parking system that's a positive asset and support system to help promote a successful and vital downtown Fort Wayne. We will hope to do that by aligning the parking organization and leadership and management and philosophy with the larger community strategic goals. You have a downtown master plan, the Blueprint Plus. I always have a hard time saying that. And again, it's great that you have that in place because that's the kind of document that we would like to align parking policies with. When we talk about goals in terms of how can parking support downtown vitality, if you'll just scan this list here, supporting economic development, developing parking into a self-funding enterprise is a goal, being customer-oriented and user-friendly, adopting best-in-class parking management strategies, Use parking. Parking can be a great tool for facilitating public-private partnerships. Have a well-promoted and marketed program, and then closely relate that and coordinate that with other downtown marketing and branding strategies, especially with the DID and the CVB and other agencies that are doing a lot of that work. The planning, it should be an active and comprehensive planning function. Parking is a component in almost every development that you're going to have downtown, and so having some expertise in that area I think is really important. But you get the sense of this organization. We want it to be unified, centralized, and what we call vertically integrated. From a funding perspective, we think it's important that parking, as any public agency, has transparency and openness and accountability. And another important aspect of this vertical integration model is that we know from other experiences that parking structures by themselves tend not to be self-supporting. They're very expensive, and you just can't charge enough. You need to charge about $150 per space per month on average to pay for debt service and maintenance of parking facilities. And you just can't charge that much in Fort Wayne. Nobody is expecting that to happen. But when you put on-street revenues and off-street revenues and enforcement revenues all in the same pot, eventually you can get to the point where all those funding sources can provide a self-supporting enterprise fund, and even put aside money for future parking structures. So we think that's an important element to be thinking about long-term as well. Programs, there's all kinds of interesting programs. We think that looking at the validation program, one of the concepts that's being done in a lot of other cities is kind of a first-hour free program to support downtown, just bringing people downtown, give downtown something positive to market regarding parking. Now, that's something that needs some careful analysis, but it is the kind of strategies that other communities are looking at doing. Developing parking system strategic goals, I think a lot of that's been done in this. Looking at the idea of an escalating fine system. This is an interesting concept because the idea here is that if you think about what the real problem regarding parking enforcement is, it's really those long-term parkers taking up what should be short-term spaces, essentially employees parking in what should be customer parking spaces. If that's the real problem, if that's the real nut we're trying to fix, why not be more forgiving on the front end for the occasional violator that was having such a good time at higher grounds with his friends that he met, he forgot that he ran over the time limit, but really make it more onerous on those people that constantly and systematically abuse the system. So there's ways to do that with differing approaches to your fine system. So lots of interesting options and alternatives that we can get into in terms of managing our parking assets. We talked about the guiding principles, and if you'll scan that list there, we basically broke that into 10 categories. Organization and leadership, integrated access and mobility management, that would be integration and support and coordination with transit, planning and policy development, marketing and promotion, effective management, is parking management best practices, a focus on customer service, looking to leverage technology to make us more efficient and effective in the providing of these services, but also to provide new customer benefits, support economic development, and sustainability made the list in terms of there are lots of things that we can do relative to parking that can contribute to sustainability initiatives if that's something you want to pursue. And then finally, funding and accountability was an important area. Again, the purpose of this was to provide a high-level strategic framework that was comprehensive and strategic, responsive to the needs of the community, and aligned with the larger community strategic and economic development goals.